So here we are in Advent. If you brave the snow, thank you so much. If you are at home, and I know that we have a lot of folks in holiday, and that is so wonderful. And thank you for the musicians for being here, and for all those who set up and made today possible. So this Advent, I feel like there's a lot of going on over here, so I'm going to try to kind of gaze around the room. This Advent, we're focusing on the aspect of Christmas story where we find Jesus in a manger. I know it sounds like we're starting from the ending and the beginning, but I promise you we are going somewhere with it. Did you know that the Christmas story is made up of two separate birth stories? One is in Matthew and one is in Luke, and they actually don't harmonize. They're both a little bit different. They're written decades apart for very, very different audiences for different reasons. And so the question would be, why two stories, right? Well, I think the two stories are a reminder that the ancient world knew something that we sometimes forget, that bigger and lasting truths transcend time and situation, last millennia, because deeper truths are big enough to need more than one story told about them. And so we are going to see the Christmas story, the manger, from different angles. But we are going to be focusing on the book of Luke. Again, sometimes churches try to mash these stories together, but on this Advent, we will focus entirely on Luke. Luke, who has shepherds and angels, a manger, swaddling clothes, things that are not found in the Matthew passage, a census and a king, and a sweet focus on a familiar story of birth and parenthood, which is as old as time. But the more fascinating reality is that both stories stand against their powerful and abusive empires that they're born into. So both stories have at their heart something that they are speaking to. For Matthew, it's Herod. For Luke, it's Caesar. And what we learn from this is that Jesus is born into the world through the image of an undignified manger as a direct critique of the powers that be, the powers that are old as time, the kind of self-serving, greedy, and domineering power that steps over ordinary working people to get more and more and more because it's never enough. But we don't worry about that this year. We are looking at the child. The Advent, we will navigate the manger by looking at the birth narrative from different perspectives and different angles. And today we're beginning where we find hope in this story. The story of the birth of Jesus begins how all good birth stories begin, with the call for government oversight and administration. Right? That's how all good birth stories begin. Fiscally speaking, that is. So this is very helpful and very inspiring. Wouldn't you agree? A census. Here's the things that are going to happen. And the accuracy of Luke's account is still up for debate. We're not sure if it's the first one, but what this story does is get Jesus to where he needs to be, which is Bethlehem. And we are looking at that story of the birth up and against the power of an emperor, a king, calling for a census. So outside of this cozy ancestral home that we meet, outside of Mary and Joseph's family, arises an opposition to this decree, right? So this decree goes out that everyone shall be counted. And why will they be counted? Do you know? Taxes, right? We always say everything. What's inevitable? Death and taxes. Well, in this case, birth and taxes are inevitable. And so there is a lot of drama surrounding what it means for them to be told to move to different places, right? And so the story begins with something very, very true, which is the idea of Roman domination. Emperors, like kings, can snap their finger and everyone's in motion. And it's very, very true that when you had to do the census, you had to go back to your ancestral home. And so it makes a lot of sense that this is where our story begins. Roman taxation, just so we know, was both regressive, meaning the lower classes had the burden of taxes rather than the wealthy landowners, and it was decentralized in its administration. So regardless, it was not advised to go against the Roman army of your local governor in order to disobey. But it does paint a rather helpful picture for us. Jesus is born into a world where his family has very little power. They had to travel at the bequest of Rome as they were an occupied people. Jesus is born into a system where he had no power or influence or birth or status. His family, being Jewish, are subjected people, subjected at this time to the whims and the rages of both the distant Roman rulers and the all too close Roman army and those Jewish leaders colluding with them. That's how life is in this outer area where we find Jesus being born, where law and order is maintained through intimidation and violence, and a financial tribute is exacted for the good of a centralized Roman ruler. I mean, just imagine it. Imagine it, if you will. And a bold contrast is being made here. The power of kingdom and empire and snapping fingers to the power of sweetness and family and the manger. Leaders and kings and rulers and governors and officials and all the powerful people are a part of this dominant culture then and now. And so Jesus, from his very first breath, neither has power nor cultural advances on his side, but he does have something worth noting: a wonderful, wonderful family. We know that all of this must have affected his life growing up. And so we talk about it because the Roman powers are there at his birth because they will be the part of his end. And so while the powerful are doing what the powerful oftentimes, unfortunately, do, historically speaking, the main part of this birth story will take place in his family's ancestral home. And so whether Caesar likes it or not, he's actually brought the family together. He's brought Jesus to safety. There might be dark forces encircling the birth of Jesus, but he's safely protected in his supportive home. He might not be born in a palace, but he is born into safety and love and care. And if we find out in this passage that he's related to a king. Of course, that doesn't give him a whole lot of power in the Roman idea of power, but it does give him great accolades in terms of his family and his heritage and his lineage. Because ironically, again, while Caesar is demonstrating the power out there, he is being sheltered inside. Family is the first place, I think, where hope grows. It's why I love talking about Jesus' family at this moment, right? Where Mary and Joseph are two people that are actually very courageous and very bold and very faithful. And so within that structure of being born into this family of faith, with a lineage that goes back to David, we see him in his family. And again, that's the first place where hope grows. And a family of faith is the best place to be reminded that we have hope because God first loved us. Our hope isn't for some future gloriously huge victory. Our hope is found in a God who comes to meet us in the simplicity of a manger, surrounded by a family of love. We might be replanted other places in our life. I know that I've moved in different places, right? But our first growth, our first bloom, our first love, our first hope is found at home. Imperfect home. With grandparents and siblings and parents and aunties and uncles and gunkles, if you're lucky, and cousins and close friends, right? Psychological research tells us that a child only needs one adult to be there for them. To be there for them in the way that you see them running up and you are so excited to see them. Where your eyes light up because they are in the room. Not because they've done anything magical, but because they are important to you. And that one adult builds lasting emotional intelligence and resilience. So what Jesus lacks in money or power, his family makes up for, I believe, in the love and support that nurtures him. Because I've always said it, right? When you see Jesus later on, he's being confronted by all the powers that be, and yet he seems to have healthy responses to things. He doesn't get angry, he doesn't get mean at people, he doesn't call people names, even though they call, he seems to be somewhat of an emotionally intelligent person, not to over-psychologize. And so I've always thought that's because he had such a nurturing, centered family life. And again, it's why it's important for me to debunk an erroneous theology of the manger story that has been passed around for a lot of years. So how many of you thought that Jesus, or ever had thought that Jesus was born in a manger in the middle of a field because the innkeeper had no room for him? Raise your hand if you believed, right? And the innkeepers always play, like, if there was ever a play, like this kid got to play the innkeeper, and usually a little like, ooh, there's no room, sweetie, for the inn. Well, show me in the passage where there's an innkeeper, right? There is no innkeeper. The room, and we use the term guest room, the room is actually the term for upper room. So when Jesus has his Passover meal, it's called that he's in the upper room, right? And so what you need to know about a family home during that time is that a family home had several levels to it. And the bottom level was always the place where the goats and all of the sheep and everything came in for the night safe, especially if it was cold or there were things that would harm them, if they didn't have shepherds out there, right? They would come in for the night. And the upper part of the house was usually reserved for older folks. It was a little nicer. It was kind of where everyone ate. And so they go to their ancestral home and they're not turned away. If you know anything about Middle Eastern hospitality, you know that there's no way that Joseph and Mary are traveling all this way with her pregnant and they're like, go to the Motel 6 down the road. It's just not going to happen. So here they are, packed into this ancestral home, and they get the bottom part. Not because it's less dignified, but because they need some time alone for her to have a child. So Jesus, it's important for us to know, was not rejected by his family, not told to go find a hotel. He was entered in, but he just couldn't be born up in the upper room because that's where everyone else was. That's the central place of the house. So Mary and Joseph are supported, but they're given privacy. And again, in the first century, when you weren't born in a castle with private rooms all over the place, you had to find a place to give birth, right? And so the focus this Advent is on the anticipation of the story of Jesus being born in this manger. That a manger represents the safety and security for the future prophetic truth teller and teacher and sacred word of God. And there is something about family and friends and going it together and having kind of a group or a tribe or a community that you love, isn't there? There's something really beautiful about that. One of my favorite recent stories, where I've loved it for a while, is called Stranger Things. Anyone watch it? It's not for the faint at heart. It's a little violent. Of course, it begins the last season, and the last few episodes are coming up. A few of them were dropped on Wednesday, and we watched them over Thanksgiving. A few more will come on Christmas, and then New Year's will be the end. And I will be sad to see this story go. Not because of the amazing special effects, or the visual effects, or the monsters, or the bad guys, or the violence, or the storyline. I'll be sad to see it go because it makes something so magical about childhood, right? It's a story that's really special because it's about how friends and family make a difference as we fight the monsters, right? Whatever those monsters look like. And they create these kind of beautiful experiences. I also love it because it's set in the 80s. And who doesn't love some 80s, right? Before the digital age, right? When there was a phone and it had one of those cords and you had to just and it wrapped around and, and then you had to get on the phone. When you had to call a home, so if you are young, you get to call your friends directly, right, on the phone. Or text them, right? No one calls anyone anymore. You text them. If I wanted to talk to a friend, I had to call the home phone and I didn't know who would pick up. Could be mom, could be dad, could be bratty brother or sister, right? And you had to have the skills it took in order to navigate the world before everything became digital, right? And I love that. It's such a beautiful and nostalgic part of the story. It helps to see them be super present in each other's lives. And of course, the story, they communicate through walkie-talkie, they communicate through covert messages over the radio. They work together to fight this evil that's taking over the world. Tale as old as time, Star Wars, right? All kinds of stories have this banding together of either chosen, biological, friend that becomes family, because every story told about a fight between good and evil is ultimately about how the good ones are winning because they are not fighting alone. Because they have a base, they have a family, they have friends. And again, there's often this sense where we can easily feel alone in our battles, powerless, defenseless. But the reminder of the story of the manger is that we are not alone, right? The origin story of our heroes and sheroes often begin in this simple way, where they're just simply born into a loving and wonderful family. And Jesus is that, has two parents that love him, a father who supports his pregnant wife, even when it might be hard, and a mother who says yes to the daunting task of giving birth to the Messiah and tells the tale of how her son will be the hope for rescue that the oppressed people long for. And so here Jesus is born in a manger, nothing glamorous, And in a sense, his birth is sort of like king's smings. Who cares? Who cares about all that going on out there? Yes, we do. We do. Because we see hope in that. We see hope in the idea that God cares so much that he sent a child to be with a family of hope and faith, a family of courage, a family that understood what was going on in the world and raised him to be a truth teller, a prophet, courageous, someone who would stand up for the oppressed. Yes, that's what it means to look at things this year from the manger. So yes, baby Jesus is almost here. And if you don't believe in the power of the manger yet, you will, because Mary, a fierce mother bear, won't let you not believe in the hope that it brings. And so my prayer and my hope this season is that we will continue to grow where we are planted, in our faith communities, in our families, with our friends, all the people that make us who we are, all the people that get excited to see us and love us no matter what, all the people that nurture hope within us. Hope grows where it's planted. May your hope grow this season as we head towards the manger at the heart of the Christmas story. May it be so. Amen.